Although educational theory categorises a range of different ways people learn, it seems that very often we expect reading or looking at screens are the ones that are going to work best. As well as being manifestly untrue, this undervalues the range and strengths of the skills by which many people engage with both the external world and their own internalised identity. One of the lessons I take from the journey that we've all been on as we move through this decade of commemoration is that history and heritage are really all about the diversity of individuals. And while presentationally it's perceived as being about events, usually process, and going on a journey, to use the trite phrase which is everywhere these days, trumps this in terms of impact. We underestimate people at our peril, and one of the affirming things I've seen coming out of the last few years is people's ability both to adjust the way they understand the past in this fluid context of history, the present and the future, but also, just as importantly, a willingness to do so. Identities only become fixed, stuck, if they are forced to become so. And one of the most brutal tools to achieve this is if barriers are put up which maintain ignorance and restrict access to the totality of the evidence. Those statements could apply across most of the ways we engage with the past. So what are the specifics of dealing with objects? After decades spent working with material culture, objects, stuff, whatever you want to call it, it would seem a life wasted if there wasn't some value in learning beyond the endless taxonomic sorting and resorting in an increasingly self-referential and reductive process. And fill in your own gaps there for examples of that. Whilst knowledge and technical processes are enormously helpful, and indeed engagement with objects is dangerous without some engagement with those things, value actually comes from the evident impact of engaging with real stuff, time travelling through touch and vision, leading to a search for meaning and understanding. This process can and ought to be truly democratic. Everyone can interact with objects in the literal and metaphorical round. The possible diversity of experience is huge, and if the possibilities are recognised and enabled, moving power around and down hierarchies is inevitable. But to return to the beginning again, what can objects do in the context of difficult and uncontested histories? Firstly, their existence within certain very wide parameters, and we'll not get into Schrodinger's cat here, if not their interpretation, are incontrovertible facts, which can sometimes contrast violently with the fictions which can sometimes attach to them. So unlike historical interpretations, Patsy, all the wonderful historians who are here, no matter how true and plausible, they cannot be denied. In addition, a big part of the way we engage with the world is through using and understanding materiality. And again, we tend to fence off engagement with objects as if it is something strange, something very specialist, something which is outside the norm. Whereas in our everyday lives, that's what we do all the time. We are perfectly comfortable with the idea that the television we watch, the car we drive, or even the humble coffee cup which we treasure and set on our desks provides a window on how we see ourselves and how others perceive us, and how much of that acquisition and use of material culture is in fact directed to presenting ourselves outwards as well as fulfilling internalised ideas of identity. Almost everyone is highly skilled at deconstructing this evidence. So why should these same skills not be applied more widely? If people are encouraged to look, then we can see, and I'm always slightly dubious when I use those terms, but I can't think of better ones. But I think that idea that actually looking at something and then really looking, which is how I interpret seeing, and then using that visual perception in a way is seeing. And very often those skills or those perceptions are greater than those of the self-proclaimed expert, of which at various times I have been one. The individuality of experience and connection can bring added value. Someone who's a craftsman will have not just a possible great understanding of the processes by which something is made, but an appreciation and a different sort of analytical intelligence from anything that I could certainly bring to bear. If an object belongs or links to a family, there can often be an added emotional intelligence available, which further deepens and expands the understanding. Another feature of the decade process is the way in which the national and the international interact with the experience of individuals. Sometimes this can be confusing or distorting if one is privileged to the detriment of the other. Surviving objects from the period are often paradigmatic of this. Mass manufacture was almost universal, so very often meaning lies not in the generic identification and classification of material culture, but rather the context, past and present, which connect them. Objects have a very real life stories, from making to use to survival, which in some ways can be seen as paralleling human experience. We tend to value the pristine or have a desire to restore. Good professional processes here provides a way of understanding, as it seeks to preserve objects as they are now and retain as much as possible of the information contained within them, as opposed to scrubbing them and making them beautiful and pristine again. Sometimes this can be in the form of what otherwise might be regarded as dirt or damage, rather than, to follow the metaphor, life experience. So, to sum up very briefly, and as I'm sure the case studies will show, objects have a huge and direct power which very often is not duplicated by other approaches. People already have the capacity to understand and use them for themselves. If professionals can walk the difficult line between mediating and supporting rather than directing and using knowledge as a form of power. We need to value individuals and diverse perception rather than trying to enforce one single way of seeing. Objects are adaptive and have an organic, mutable relationship to narratives of the past, and importantly can bridge across between national, group and individual experience. Thank you.
Very impressive, Robert. Less than 8 minutes. You've been practicing. There'll be time for questions and answers at the end. I'm going to move on now to introduce Sean Pettis from the Corrymeela community, and he will talk to us about contact culture and conflict around the causeway.
So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about this project, Contact Culture and Conflict Around the Causeway, Exploring the Heritage of the Ulster Plantations, which is a short and snappy title, I'm sure you'll agree. This was really a joint initiative between Corrymeela, the universities, Belfast City Council and Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council, and that's really been a key part of how we've operated, because what it's been about is pooling the collective skills of each of the organisations. So I want to very quickly do 3 things, give you a little bit about the purpose, a bit of background to how we delivered it, and then give a couple of examples of how we used objects in the project. But essentially what we were trying to do with this project was engage with that complex history and heritage of the Ulster Plantations. So we're moving well before Partition, here about 400 years ago. The project is about developing skills in interpreting archaeological findings and in particular material culture and objects or stuff, as Robert referred to it, and to challenge perceptions about the relationships between the peoples of Britain and Ireland, and to think about what does this matter for today. So we're looking at the past, but we're also thinking about does any of this matter for today. The methodology, we largely deliver this project through residentials, unsurprisingly, given Corrymeela's involvement. But also the sites that we visited are all largely in and around North East Ulster. So we did some pre-residential work, the bulk of the activity happened in residential, and then we did some follow-up reflection work. We worked with about 90 people, 5 community groups, over the course of pretty much a year. So in terms of moving into thinking about objects, the the process really started by thinking about objects, and we challenged people to imagine that an archaeologist was excavating their house 400 years from now. Choose one everyday object from your home that tells a story and bring it to the residential. And then we then created an exhibition based on objects from the current period. But what we asked people to do was try and forget their existing cultural knowledge and to imagine they knew nothing about these objects and to try and interpret them. Now, with some groups that work better than others, it's quite a leap. It requires a fair amount of imagination. But if you've ever shown a child or a teenager an old cassette tape and asked them what that is, that's the type of thing where we're trying to get people to do, to forget their existing cultural knowledge. So we're looking at objects that people are familiar with. We began to think about where, when you found an object in the landscape, would that tell you something about, would that tell you more about what it means, what's its relevance? So going from objects into where they're found in the landscape. The bulk of the programme involves site visits around North East Ulster. So there was 4 main sites, Dungiven, Priory and O'Cahon's Tomb up in Dungiven. Of course, the iconic Dunluce Castle and the lost town of Dunluce adjacent to the castle. Corrymeela Town Centre, which carries a plantation layout. And probably lesser known, Movanagar Plantation Village, which is between Corrymeela and Kilrea on the Ban. So the bulk of the programme was going and visiting those sites in depth and learning more, particularly from the archaeologists, about what they're discovering about them. And so when we used material culture and objects, sometimes we were using them in the setting of Corrymeela Town Hall. Sometimes we were exploring them out on the fields, on the sites where they were actually discovered, where they were dug up. Some of the objects have survived from the period and been handed through, and some of them are the result of excavation. So there was a real mixture there. Whilst the project was primarily working with community groups, we've also been able to pilot some aspects of it with young people, as you can see in the bottom photographs. So I want to very quickly talk about 3 particular objects. So we have the ceremonial sword. I can't begin to tell you how much joy it brought to adults to get the chance to hold a sword, as well as young people. And often we would ask, well, what is it? What's it about? You'd get it's a weapon, it's been used in battle. I can definitely see where the blood would have flown. Those kind of responses. But in actual fact, the Ferrara sword is a ceremonial one, and what we used it to do was to get into conversations about relationships and power structures at the time. And of course, it's still in the possession of what's now Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council, so it remains a symbol of civic governance today. So there's continuity between past and present. Archaeologists love pottery. So I couldn't do this presentation and not touch on some pottery. The interesting thing about this particular object is it may not look that exciting on face value, and we asked people to kind of interpret, well, what do you think it is? What's it made of? What might it be used for? You can see probably better in the bottom left picture that it's part of a cooking pot. But as the archaeologists began to layer on some knowledge to this particular object is found in Movanagar Field, what was Movanagar Plantation Village, if you like. And we know both from archaeological evidence and from maps surviving from the period that there was English-style houses and more traditional Irish-style houses. So in some senses, it's some kind of mixed community. And we have evidence that English settlers in that particular village adopted the Irish practice of cooking with the pot directly in the coals rather than suspending them above a flame. So that begins to ask questions of, well, how did this exchange happen? What did it look like to live in that town in that time? Do people share recipes? What was life like in a mixed area? This notion that the period of the plantations brought instant division is challenged a wee bit through some of these ideas. And then one of the objects used particularly with young people is the Lithuanian coin. So it is unearthed in a dig in Dunluce, in the lost town of Dunluce in 2009. We know it's minted in Vilna, Lithuania, in and around 1547. So one of the things we'll ask people is, well, why is it there? How did it end up there? And to develop your own theory. And actually any theory is valid, because the reality is, as Robert spoke of, we often don't know with objects why they end up where they end up. But our best guess is that there was extensive Scottish migration across to northeast Europe in the 16th century. So you can imagine a situation where folk have gone to get some work, they've got that as a memento, maybe made it into some kind of necklace, handed it down to a son or a grandson, who's then been part of a new wave of migration from Scotland across the Dunluce, and it's ended up in the ground somehow. But the really fascinating thing about that particular object is on the day it's excavated, there are some workers from the cheese factory in Corrymeela who are Polish, and they're able to translate the coin for the archaeologists and others that were there. So you're talking about 2 or 3 waves of immigration, 400 years, and some new migrants helped to interpret that object. So you're into all kinds of conversations about whether migrations are new or an old phenomenon. Just to finish up, some of the key ingredients for us in this project, and in particular of using objects, was really the really supportive and enthusiastic local government staff who were risk takers, who were prepared to open up their objects so that people in the community could get to really engage with them. So it's perfectly fine to have objects behind screens and in safety containers, but there's nothing like being able to actually hold it, to interpret it, to play with it safely. And the other really important aspect was that the academics that were discovering new things about this period were really keen to share their knowledge with the community. The idea of democratic practice, again, is that ultimately it's up to people how they want to interpret it or understand an object. You can certainly challenge things with historical facts, but what relevance an object has to somebody is entirely up to them. And of course, you need to have communities and people that want to work with you, and thankfully in this particular project, we have that. So that's me. Thank you very much.
And our final case study from this session is from Fiona Byrne, who will be talking to us about remembering 1916 Your Stories. And Fiona is from the National Museums Northern Ireland, and we're particularly pleased to invite her to have her here today because she's interrupted a period of leave in order to do that, such as her dedication to this work. So Fiona, over to you.
Hello, I'd like to tell you, I should say first of all that Stella's going to have to pry this mic off me. There's so much I'd love to tell you about today. So Robert did 8 minutes, I'm going to take his 2 and might take one of Sean's as well. Also, I'm always very nervous talking about this in front of a former lecturer of mine at Queen's, so Marie, just step outside for a minute there, will you? Now, how do I move over? Oh, got my wee clicker, right. Sorry, forgive me, I'm rusty. I'm on maternity leave, so the mind's a little rusty. Remember, 1916 opened of March 2016, and it was quite a challenge for us as a museum. We had our own internal issues and challenges to deal with, let alone the topic being one that had to be dealt with certain sensitivities. Talking about 1916. It was a small exhibition in our temporary room at the Ulster Museum. I know many of you have seen it today, see familiar faces. Just flicking through some of the pictures here, we had a huge section that covered the Easter Rising, one that covered the Battle of the Somme, and another covered all the other theatres of war that happened throughout 1916. And the final case covered the legacy of the 2 main issues, or the 2 main events there, which was Easter Rising and the Battle of the Somme. I think the main message we were trying to get across in this exhibition was that 2 pivotal events occurred in 1916, the Rising and the Somme, but other things happened in 1916 that men from this island were involved in, and certainly women, such as the Battle of Verdun, for instance. We had a medal on display. Also, people viewed these events as 2 very separate events, and yet they are connected, they are linked together by the environment that the First World War created. Flicking through various elements of the exhibition, we had our own challenges with our own objects. Having a major refurbishment done of our modern history gallery a few years previous, we had a lot of our main key items on display that related to 1916. And that being our 36 Ulster Division-based depot flag, which was unearthed. We believe it was only shown in the museum a few months in 1966 and hasn't been seen since. So we're delighted to have it out on display in our main history gallery, along with an original copy of the Provisional Government Proclamation. Also a very small medal, but very important item. This was awarded to Miss Louisa Nolan for her bravery and her actions in saving both civilians and soldiers during the Easter Rising. So with key items already on display, we were trying to dig deeper into our collection to find more items to tell this 1916 story. So going back to the old accession registers here, we found that quite a lot of material was donated during wartime and immediately after the First World War. Again, trying to find these objects was another matter, but we did our best to excavate during the collections and pull out some of these objects. 1916 First World War hand grenade was a very exciting item that we found, and it had red hands scratched at the bottom of it, and we believe that this was made in a factory in Craigavon. Other items include a UVF nurse's bag, a toy First World War tank, and a very unusual stick there that you see, wooden carved stick. That was donated in March 1919 by Gunner Clements of the Royal Field Artillery, and he lived on the Shankill Road. And the note from the museum staff at the time, in 1919, said that Gunner Clements witnessed the killing of, his name's just escaped me now, but a soldier from the Connacht Rangers by a German officer, and he in turn killed the German officer with this stick and kept it and brought it home and donated it in 1919. So some very extraordinary items there, which were trying to tell these human stories, these people's stories of the First World War, and people took souvenirs home which help us interpret their stories. Now, I also worked for the Living Legacies Centre, which is trying to bridge academic research with communities. And we did various roadshows across Northern Ireland. We did about 12 in Omagh, in Enniskillen, Derry, Newry, various ones in Belfast, for example. And really what we wanted to provide another dimension to this exhibition by reaching out to find community stories and objects. And we really, really hoped that people would come along and tell them to us. So we didn't know whether people would turn up or not, or whether we'd get exciting stories, whether we'd get any objects, or whether we were just wasting our time. But glad to say that we did not waste our time, and it was very fruitful. You can't really see it too well on the photograph here, but if you can see, it's a Chinese plait. But that was a very extraordinary item. You just came in with a plastic bag to one of the roadshows that we did in East Belfast, and it was just rolled up in a ball. To be honest, when I took it out, I thought, is this a rat? I didn't know what it was, but it is a plait. Now, traditionally it was called a Chinese queue. Now, trying to tell the story of this one, he told us that their great uncle, David Waters, who was a private, he was promoted to sergeant in 1916, but he joined the Labour Corps. And the story that was passed down in the family was that he witnessed a disciplinary action, and he retrieved this plait from the Chinese man who lost it, and he took it home as a very strange souvenir and kept it in the house ever since. And this came down at their attic when they heard about our roadshow. So we're delighted that people dug deep into their houses, went up to the attic, pulled medals out of the drawer, and wanted to dig deep to find the First World War story and tell it to us. Now, this plait, of course, is an extraordinarily strange item, and it tells the story of Sergeant David Waters. But to us, as an institution, as a museum, we can only tell the story through objects. We're not a book on walls with smartphones and things. People have information at their fingertips, but that's not what the museum does. We interpret objects and we tell the stories through objects. And objects, as Robert has said, are extremely powerful, and they can connect to people and connect to their emotions. And so for us in the museum, we wanted to tell the story of the Labour Corps in 1916, but we didn't have any objects actually to do that in order to tell that story. So this object, which they kindly lent for our exhibition, allowed us to tell that story. Another extraordinary item we found was this blood-stained notebook. Gary Ming, who's pictured there proudly beside his notebook on display, it belonged to a relative of his, Private Adam Stewart. Now, this bloodstained notebook was all that was sent back to his mother when he died on July 1st, 1916. And through the evaluation of this exhibition, this was the one object that people kept mentioning mentioning over and over again. They really related to this. They were touched by it. They were saddened by it. The fact that it's, it's blood stained and it's torn, and it's obviously been in a battle, and it was sent back from the Somme to Derry. And again, it just emphasises the power of these objects, and that we were very happy that people kindly lent their objects to us to show on display. Other objects that we came across were this lovely photograph, a very rare photograph of Winifred Carney with her sisters and her mother as a young woman. I think the image most people use now is of Winifred as an older lady. So we were very delighted that a relative came along and showed us this photograph, and again lent it for display. The photograph below is actually of this was the one family who didn't want to lend the object on display, this photograph, but it's actually a photograph of their great uncle who he signed up in January 1916, and he was just trained up, and then he thought he was being sent to France, because of course the enemy was the Germans, but then in April 1916 he was sent to Dublin, and he spoke about this confusion that he was sent to fight his own countrymen. This was a time of confusion for him. He didn't really speak any further about it, they said. So this photograph is actually, he's in this photograph at one of the barricades that was taken, and this has been widely replicated, postcards of the Easter Rising, etc. But the family didn't want to lend it, but they treasure it very much, and they have it on display in their house. Key donations, and the timing of this tunic was just brilliant, because we didn't actually have an Irish volunteer tunic. I think people assume that as a national institution, you're bound to have this object and you're bound to have this and that. Yes, our collection is very rich, but we are limited by it. And this tunic actually came from Canada, and we were very happy with this donation, and it allowed us to display it. This tunic belonged to a man called Jack Greenan. He was from County Armagh, and it's in excellent condition, it is. This man, according to the family history, planned to go down and fight at the Easter Rising, but didn't get down. And I suppose that's the Easter Rising, that's the northern story of the Easter Rising. Many did not get down to fight and things. So the good condition of this tunic certainly tells that story, that he did not fight. Not just to be host the... Sorry? Oh God, 1 minute, I'm only halfway through. Well, I'll go very quickly. Not only did we produce this exhibition, there was a whole programme of events right 1916. We did various handling workshops with community groups, school groups. As you can see, trying on the First World War German helmet was always a hit. And I think it's important the power of these objects to be truly understood. You need to handle some as well. It's not just seeing them on display. And if you see the young child wearing the soft peak cap, comparing it to the heavy German helmet, again, this allowed the children to fully understand, God, I'd feel more protected in this German helmet than the peak cap. And of course, during the First World War, with new technologies, they had to quickly modify their personal protective equipment, their uniforms, their helmets, etc. Because this was the first time the machine gun was used in the First World War. So of course, the uniforms were adapted. And we really got that message across with the kids, along with many other messages. I'd love to show you a clip of William Hunter actually talking about his father's experience as a stretcher bearer, but I don't have time. But please, you can look at all these online at the National Museum's website, 1916, or the Living Legacies website. Fortunately, I can't go through it right now. But just to go, evaluation from this, it ran for about 13 months, this exhibition, and 78% of people thought it was good or very good, and we were very thrilled with that. Of course, you can't please everybody, and some people were disgusted, absolutely horrified that we dare put the Battle of the Somme objects in the same room as objects from the Easter Rising, but we're like, how dare you compare them, things like that. But we're not comparing these, and I think when people understand the role of museums, we weren't comparing them at all. We were actually saying these events are connected. They were connected by the First World War. They're connected today as events that we look back on, and the legacy of those two events, especially, we got the message across in our legacy case. There was various posters of 1966, and it was just before the Troubles started, the 50th anniversary of these events and things like that, so that was covered in the exhibition as well. Another great thing about displaying your objects is that more people come forward. And the Louisa Nodal medal that I spoke about earlier, this man was actually a relative of Louisa Nodal, and I had no idea her medal was in the Ulster Museum. And he had this very old, beautiful photograph of Louisa, which he let us copy, and he wanted his photograph taken holding the medal. So things like that are great when we display things in the museum. It allows people to come forward with their stories and their connections to objects, especially ones we have on display. So thank you very much. I'm available if you want questions afterwards. And of course, the 1916 report is very detailed in all the comments and how people felt about the exhibition. And I can send that to anybody if they ask for it. Thank you.